to say that vaccine is not for profit. Vaccine is for people. And we all know that vaccine is really dividing countries into rich and poor, and those who are able to access and not able to access. And not only between the countries, within the countries, we have seen this kind of a cleavage where those who are able to afford are able to have the vaccine, and those who are excluded, intergenerationally and otherwise, are being excluded also from this vaccine. So this is an effort to understand the dynamics of this vaccine, and why it has been difficult, and why the access to it is being difficult, and how we as citizens of this world of several nationalities, we have a responsibility to make sure that we demand equality even in the way vaccine is being distributed and accessed by the communities. And we have today many eminent speakers. Most of all, I would like us all to welcome Professor Jaiti Ghosh. She's a professor of economics. As we all know, she doesn't need much of an introduction. We have heard her in many seminars across the world. She's now teaching at the University of Massachusetts. Of course, we claim her still as from JNU, Delhi. And welcome, Professor Jaiti Ghosh. We're very happy that you are here to kick off this whole discussion and bring in critical aspects of this people's vaccine and the dynamics. Over to you, Professor Jaiti. You may need to unmute.
I'm sorry. You can hear me now? Yes. Thank you so much, Paul. I'm very happy to be with all of you, and I'm not going to waste more time. Let me just try and explain exactly what is going on with the vaccines. As Paul mentioned, I think everybody knows how incredibly unequal this has been. 75% of the vaccines in the world have gone to just 10 countries. And they are all, as we know, the advanced rate, more than half the adult population, and in some countries, almost all the adult population. Whereas in many parts of the world, including in India, but also in large parts of Africa, Latin America, developing Asia, there are some countries where there have been no vaccinations at all. There are some which have vaccinated less than 1% of the population. Even India, the 2 doses have been received by less than 3% of the population. And as we know, the disease is raging in many parts of the developing world right now, just when advanced countries seem to be recovering from it. So what exactly happened and what is going on? First, let us understand that this is the fastest ever approval of vaccines that we have experienced in history. Normally, vaccine approval takes about the whole process of when you start looking for solutions to when a vaccine is approved has taken about 5, 6, 7 years. And that is, of course, because of the research required, but also because the final regulatory approval depends on a series of tests in terms of what exactly this vaccine does, how long the effect lasts, what other byproducts it can have on the human being. All of these things are very carefully considered. So we should first bear in mind that all the vaccines that are available today are only with emergency approval, right? Remember, so none of them has been finally approved. They are all emergency authorization, as it's called, by the WHO, by the different countries. So Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, all of them are only emergency approval. Within that, there is a subset that has received approval by the World Health Organization. And that is really only 4 vaccines so far. Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and the Sinopharm, which received regulatory approval only 2 weeks ago. All the others, which are seen to be workable, whether it is the Russian vaccine, the Sputnik 5, or Sinovac, the other Chinese vaccine, or several other Covaxin in India, etc., they have received approval only from their own countries' regulatory authorities, not from the World Health Organization. And that makes it difficult for many other countries to actually declare that they will use these. You have to take that gamble. You have to say, we don't care about WHO regulatory authority before you start using those vaccines, which is further limited supply. How did it happen that we did not get a people's vaccine as we had thought we would get, but we got all these little different vaccines which are being so unequally distributed? In fact, when the demand for a people's vaccine was raised, which is very early on last year, from about April 2020, the demand for a people's vaccine has been raised. At that time, the global solution was COVAX, which is the COVID-19. It's a special facility set up by the World Health Organization, by the Vaccine Alliance Gavi, and the Council for Epidemiological Preparedness. So they set up this facility, COVAX, which is supposed to actually do procurement and distribution on behalf of everybody, to centralize it in a global scheme and share the vaccines equally. So the idea was that they would procure the vaccines, and then they would give each country first 3% of its population worth so that they can deal with the frontline workers who are most at risk. Then 20% of the population to cover, again, the more vulnerable people, elderly, and whichever groups are seen as vulnerable. And then it would go to countries where there are other concerns, maybe there's some other kind of epidemic going on, or there are others, there's a surge in the disease, and then it would go to everybody, finally. That was the plan, and that seemed fair and equitable. It had two major flaws. The first flaw is that it was massively underfunded. Even to achieve the reasonable requirement that they had expected in the first 6 months, they estimated a requirement of about $26 billion. They have received less than 5 billion altogether even now. So the developed countries that were part of it, they have not really contributed what they should have. 92 countries are supposed to get vaccines free, paid for by the contributions of the developed countries. And the other countries, the rich countries and the middle income countries, are supposed to pay for their vaccines at a reasonable rate decided by WHO. The ultimate result of the underpayment is that, in fact, COVAX has not been able to procure enough. And that is because also the second very major design flaw, which is that COVAX said, yes, we will procure on behalf of the global community, but it did not prevent countries from doing side deals with the private companies that had developed the vaccines. So COVAX was actually undercut by all the same rich country governments doing side deals with Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca within a month of the regulatory approval. Actually, even before that, when they were in the final stages and it was seen that they were performing well, these countries went and made advance bookings so that already, 80% of the global supply of just these three vaccines was booked up by late October 2020. 80% of the estimated global supply of 2021 was already booked up. And some countries went crazy. The US ordered around 4 times its population's worth. Canada ordered 11 times its population in terms of number. The European Union also ordered way in excess of its population, I think, again, almost 3 times. It's not that they have all received it, because of course there are limits on supply, and I will come to that. But that's one of the things that happened, is that, you see, not only was COVAX underfunded, but the rich countries went and grabbed vaccines. And that is why you find in the US, more than half the adult population has been vaccinated. And they're sitting on huge stockpiles of vaccines that they will never use. They're currently using Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, but they have stockpiles of 80 million AstraZeneca vaccines that they are not using. And similarly, other countries that have, but the US is the largest, but there are many others that have stockpiles and surpluses at this point. But that also is only one of the limitations on supply. The biggest limitation and the most important limitation is the fact that this supply is artificially controlled. There is no is an artificial shortage. Could I request everybody else to mute their microphones? Thank you. There is an artificial supply shortage, which is resulting from the fact that these companies have got patents that allow them to actually prevent other producers. They determine who produces and how much is produced, because they can produce as much as they want, and they have the power to grant licenses to any other producers or not to grant licenses to other producers. And so these patent rights have emerged as the biggest reason, the artificial reason for the shortage of supply, for the reason why we do not have enough vaccines. Now, what exactly does this mean? You see, these patents are globally implemented by the World Trade Organization through the Trade-Related Intellectual Property Rights Agreement, or TRIPS. And TRIPS allows countries to actually bring cases, legal cases, against other countries that are trying to bring in compulsory licensing and say, well, we will allow these other companies to make this vaccine. So TRIPS, can expose you to cases against this. And this is why a case was brought in the WTO by India, South Africa, and now supported by the majority of WTO members. And even the US has agreed to support it most recently, but other developed countries are resisting it. The waiver, the TRIPS waiver, says that all the diagnostics, vaccines, and therapeutics associated with COVID-19, not just the vaccines, of course the vaccines, but also all the testing kits, the treatments, the ventilators, the medicines that are associated with it, like remdesivir and so on, all of them, the intellectual property rights on these should be waived for the period of the pandemic, which basically means that countries cannot bring legal cases in WTO against one another if they allow other companies to produce it through compulsory licensing. It's a very limited request. It's not saying that all of this will immediately happen. It's simply saying that the WTO will not allow cases to be brought in this period for these things, okay? Even that is being fought tooth and nail by the pharma companies and resisted by the advanced economies, basically. The same countries that have grabbed the vaccines are preventing other countries from expanding production of these vaccines. Why do they do this? They say, well, it's absolutely essential for innovation. That's why we have vaccines so fast, is because these companies went and did the R&D and produced it. And so therefore we have the vaccines. If we stop the patent protection now, we will disincentivize them. They are not going to help us in the next pandemic or the next crisis, because the incentive to innovate will be lost. That is their argument. This is a completely false argument. Why is it completely false? Because most of the research that goes into the making of these vaccines is based on prior public research. The two big new innovations, mRNA vaccines that are produced by Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna. These were basically developed, the basic mRNA technology was developed in public labs by a Hungarian scientist and another group in the University of Pennsylvania. And it's really that only final, tiny last mile that was then developed to make the specific COVID-19 vaccine. Even that was publicly funded. Moderna received 1.6 billion from the US government, which more than covered its R&D costs. BioNTech, which basically produced the Pfizer vaccine, BioNTech received 458 million from the German government, and so on. So, they all received a very large amount of money to do the R&D. AstraZeneca, the case is even more remarkable. It was produced in Oxford by a lab in Oxford University, a publicly funded lab, funded entirely by public and charitable money. And the original idea was that this vaccine would be globally available. The knowledge would be put online on a website. They would just put everything there so that others could also make it. The Gates Foundation, which has given a lot of money to Oxford University for health innovation, the Gates Foundation intervened in July 2020 and made Oxford University sign a solitary deal unique for AstraZeneca. So AstraZeneca now holds those knowledge rights. What has happened as a result? They are not giving licenses to other producers. Very, very limited. AstraZeneca has licensed a few, Serum Institute of India and a handful of others. There are at this moment at least 10 applications pending with these 3 companies, from companies in Canada, companies in Israel, Chile, Bangladesh, Malaysia, that have asked for licenses and have state-of-the-art production facilities. May I please request people to just, yeah, thank you. These are pending. They have asked for the licenses, the companies are not granting it. And so companies that could have expanded production, they are being prevented from doing so because of these monopoly rights that these companies have, even though this was publicly funded research. It was not something that, you know, they did on their own and now they have to be rewarded. They've already been more than rewarded. They've already got massive super profits this year. Pfizer's profits this year are estimated to be above 24 billion. So it's absolutely crazy the way in which the rewards have already been received, and yet they are controlling the production. The issue, however, is not just about the IPR. The IPR is an important, or rather the legal issue of IPR. That is one important thing. But giving the waiver in WTO is just the first step. You also have to make these companies transfer the knowledge, transfer the technology, because vaccine production is more complicated than some other drugs. With some other drugs, you can do reverse engineering. You can take the chemical compound, break it down, and decide that we will make it ourselves. With vaccines, it is a more complicated production that requires many different steps. With mRNA, there are, I think, at least 40, 50 different steps. And so it's complicated. That knowledge has to be carefully and precisely given by those who have the knowledge. That means that in addition to transfer of technology, you must actually force these companies to share the knowledge widely. And this is possible. We know that because in the US, the President Biden forced Johnson & Johnson, which has developed an approved vaccine here, to share their technology with Merck, another drug company in the US, so that they would expand their production. Now, if you can do that, if you can make Johnson & Johnson share with Merck, you can make Johnson & Johnson share with everybody, share with the WHO's COVID-19 technology access pool, which will provide many more producers with that knowledge. Yet it is not being done. This also is something that we have to push for a people's vaccine. One more point I would just like to remind everybody that, this issue of the TRIPS waiver, of course, it will prevent countries from getting the problem of facing a case. So it removes a legal barrier, but it also moves another operational barrier because many of these vaccines require more than one patent. The mRNA vaccines, for example, the very production involves around 64 different patents because different elements of it and different processes are also patented. So Pfizer and Moderna have taken those licenses, have got those patents. But any new producer will have to do that again. You'll have to do it company by company, item by item in each case. Imagine how long that will take, how complicated that will be. A TRIPS waiver would eliminate all of that. You don't have to do that. You can get the technology and then start producing with the quality controls. And obviously, nobody is saying you do this with poorer quality. Also remember that this doesn't mean the companies will still not get rewarded. Even with compulsory licensing, they will get rewarded. Just it'll be a reasonable reward. It will not be a monopoly super profit. So with a compulsory license, governments can allow other producers with a reasonable return, a reasonable royalty. Drug companies are resisting this, and the global situation is such that they have such control over advanced country governments that these advanced country governments are also resisting this in the WTO. So we have to demand for a people's vaccine. We have to demand that, first of all, this TRIPS waiver must occur for the legal hurdles to be removed. And secondly, that the transfer of technology must be mandatory for any company that has received public funding to develop these vaccines, because they're being rewarded twice. And people, the public, which is being denied these vaccines, is paying twice over. Taxpayers paid for the research, now they're again paying for the vaccine. Finally, I would just like to point out that in a pandemic, these vaccines have to be publicly administered free of cost. In other words, the people who get the vaccines should not be paying. And this is true for most of the world. Okay, even the most market-oriented, obscenely commercialized health systems in the world, like the US, which is a very privatized health system, they're distributing the vaccines free. Okay, because it's a pandemic, it is a public health issue. You want to persuade, they are now offering incentives to people. Please come, you'll get a hamburger if you vaccinate. You'll get a holiday trip, you'll get a lottery if you vaccinate. These are the kinds of incentives they are offering. Instead, in India, Pakistan, I think we're probably the only two countries in the world where people are being made to pay for vaccines, which is not just obscene and unequal, but it's ridiculous. You will not stop a pandemic if you make this kind of inequality. So the idea that you can make people pay rather than the state, that is not just nonsensical, that's absolutely counterproductive if you really want to deal with the pandemic. But also globally, the idea that if you do not make vaccines accessible to everyone, you will not solve that pandemic. That has to get into the heads of advanced country governments as well. They keep saying this, they keep mouthing this slogan, no one is safe until everyone is safe, but they haven't understood it in their own heads. And we have to make them understand that as long as the whole world is not adequately protected, inoculated, this pandemic, the virus will mutate, you will get new variants, and then you will have to go into the whole thing of revaccinating everyone all over again. You will not solve this problem. And so for the people's vaccine, we must demand that we get the TRIPS waiver, the transfer of technology, and the setting up of production facilities as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, in as many locations as possible. And finally, we have to bear this experience in mind for future generations and for future pandemics, which could happen even in the next few years. So we have to take this experience and make sure that we do not allow this to happen again. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Professor Jayati. Very, very sharp, and in very common terms, you have made us, most of us activists, to clearly understand the demands, the four demands that you want. Demand the people's vaccine, waiver of TRIPS, access to the vaccine, and also transfer of technology. And ensure that we really make this demand in as many countries as possible. And this is one thing which is also quite interesting, because many of our countries, as you know, are demanding one such thing, because most of the southern countries are doing it. And for once, we don't have to really struggle against the country, but work with the country, but against these corporates who are able to, who are still wanting to make profits and not have access to the people's vaccination. Thank you very much. And I know you wanted to leave, but maybe after three more panelists share, I will open the floor for a little while for specific any concerns or queries they will want to raise with you. Is that okay?
Yes, certainly. Yeah. Yes.
Friends, just technical things. Anybody who's unable to mute, the host will remove you. Please make sure that you're able to mute and not disturb the process. And some of you are doing all sorts of gimmicks while having your video on. Please close the video, and so that the bandwidth also will be shared equally from men. And some of you the names are not clear, and kindly look at the names of your screen and rename yourself. And also to request you again, there is a interpretation facility in French, Spanish, and English. Please make full use of it. And if you have any problems, please make sure that you put it in the chat, and the administrators will immediately clear it for you. I'm very happy to request Stefania Burbo from GCAP Italy to share her experience on this. And Stefania, because of the time constraint, we're able to give only 6 minutes. A bell will go before 1 minute, so kindly kindly have your presentation now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm pleased to give you an overview of the Civil 20 commitment to an equitable access to vaccines. Just a few words on the C20. Civil 20 is the official engagement group of the G20, gathering more than 500 civil society organizations from all over the world. Every year, the Civil 20 is dialoguing with the G20 institutions on the topics of the G20 agenda. And of course, this year, global health is particularly high in the G20 agenda. This year, I'm the C20 chair, and I'm also one of the 3 coordinators of the C20 Global Health Working Group. The Civil 20 is absolutely in favor of the TRIPS waiver, and we have been advocating in its support in different moments. We submitted a statement together with Labor 20, that is another G20 engagement group representing trade unions mostly. And we also advocated during the process leading to the Global Health Summit that was held last week. As a Civil 20, we urge the G20 leaders to support the TRIPS waiver, to translate into actions the announced commitment aimed at making all COVID-19 tools as global public goods. I don't want to repeat what has just been perfectly said. We support the TRIPS waiver for ethical purpose, and also because in practice it is really important not to have a monopoly on the COVID-19 tools. But again, I don't want to repeat because it has already very well explained. I can say that we affirm that public financing should be at the core of public health services, and recognize that the CTAP initiative launched by WHO and the TRIPS waiver are needed together with the ACT accelerator. Now, I would like to say a few words on the Global Health Summit outcomes that was held last Friday. It was co-hosted by the European Commission and the Italian G20 presidency. World leaders approved the Rome Declaration of Principles aimed at guiding joint action to prevent future health crises and to build a safer and sustainable world. And they recognized that everyone should have the necessary tools and commodities to respond to COVID-19. And there were also additional resources and commitments and additional pledges, both from world leaders and pharmaceutical companies. Coming back to TRIPS waiver, the Rome Declaration has a reference to the Doha Declaration on the TRIPS agreement and public health. And we had also world leaders that had a kind of in a sort were open towards the TRIPS waiver. We had the Draghi, the Italian Prime Minister. He said that one suggestion is to introduce a patent waiver on COVID-19 vaccine, and that Italy is open to this idea. Also, the French and Spanish leaders were open towards the TRIPS waiver. not so much the von der Leyen, President von der Leyen of the European Commission. She spoke very much in favor of voluntary licensing. She said it is the best way, and she spoke about a third way that she will present to the WTO at the beginning of June. This third way is, she didn't clarify very much. She said that this third way has three components: trade facilitation and disciplines on export restrictions, support for expansion of production, and clarifying and simplifying the use of compulsory licensing in crisis times like the current one. As a Civil 20, we feel that the endorsement and the principles of the Global Health Summit are not as bold and ambitious to urgently address the COVID-19, particularly in Latin America, South Asia, and in some African regions. We are highly concerned that the declaration will not translate into action, and in particular with regard to IP, to the TRIPS waiver. But at least there are various opportunities in the coming weeks and months to translate this endorsement into action, into a roadmap, starting from the World Health Assembly that has just started, and the WTO TRIPS Council. And so we as a Civil 20, we will be closely monitoring the commitments made during the Global Health Summit, as well as the endorsements, to see if they will be realized. So I will stop here to give more space to other speakers. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Stefania. Very clear and very focused. And thank you for your steps that you're sharing as Civil Society 20 in trying to address very critical issues, being in the North and getting the support of the countries and asking for clear demands so that we all can have access to people's vaccine. And we have much to learn, and I hope you will continue to be with us as we are doing the campaign planning towards the end. Thank you very much. May I request now Arjun Bhattarai from NGO Federation of Nepal, and he's also the Global Council member of GCAP. Over to you, Arjun Bhai.
Okay,
also 6 minutes, kindly.
Okay, thank you very much for giving this opportunity. And I'm going to share very briefly the vaccination situation in Asia. The COVID-19 pandemic has created a human crisis, not only in terms of healthcare, but also in global economic and social system, which is struggling to meet its demand and shape the life of the people in Asia and the world. Economics magazine estimates that the true death toll from COVID-19 so far is more likely 10 million people, not 3 millions. And that 2/3 of this death have not been in the rich nations, but in poor and middle income countries, and most of them are in Asia. It is unfortunate that it took the explosive second wave of the pandemic within the country, which is now devastating India, Nepal, and some part of the Asian countries. And as Dr. Ghosh said, that most of the countries now have started vaccination, starting from the UK on December 8, 2020. And vaccination has been undertaken by several countries. The biggest vaccination campaign in history is underway in the world. According to Bloomberg, more than 1.6 billion doses have been administered across 166 countries. The latest rate was roughly 29.1 million doses a day. So it is the It seems like a huge number. However, still there is a lack behind of many peoples in the Asia. Enough doses have now been administered to fully vaccinate, suppose almost 11% of the global population, but the distribution has been lopsided. Like countries and regions with the highest income are getting vaccinated more than 30 times faster than those without the load, with the lowest. So here I am going to some example of the Asian country, like in the China now already they gave vaccinated for like 18.2% of their populations, and India like almost 7.3%, like Malaysia 3.7% of their population, Indonesia 4.7%, Thailand 2.1%, Myanmar 2.8%, Saudi Arabia 19%. So the highest number, the population already got the vaccine in Saudi Arabia. Iraq 0.7%, Iran 1.9%, Kazakhstan 7.6%, Nepal 4.4% population got a vaccine, Pakistan 1.3%, South Korea 5.4%, so Yemen less than 1%, so 0.1%. So those are a couple of data like I got from the Bloomberg, and then the situation is more likely more than less than 8% in average, getting vaccination in the Asian countries. And there is no doubt that COVID-19 has a huge global trauma operating on a personal, family, community, national and global scale all at once. The vaccine give promotion, which I share, is not significant as COVID is rapidly increasing in this region. Other fact that we are facing now, the emerge of the new COVID-19 variants should be a major consideration in determining the allocation of vaccination to countries around the world. Truly equitable vaccination allocation and distribution should mean that countries are able to acquire not just any vaccination, but the right vaccination adapted to the presence of new variants and to constitute factor at the right time and the right price. And to date, till today, more than 174 million people globally have been vaccinated, but almost still left behind from marginal community like poor, women, disabled, LGBTIQ, Dalit, engineers, youth, children, and peoples who have not access to the power and the government mechanism. Moreover, many wealthy countries have ordered 2 to 3 times as many vaccines as are actually required by their populations, and some are even set up to receive vaccine from the COVAX facility, which many developing countries actually trusting to get vaccine from that mechanism. But I do not think that inequality. I do think that inequality in the way the measure and record in this pandemic have direct implication for how it is understood at the time, how it is the response to, and how it will be the remember. Like low income countries are often more reliant on COVAX, as Professor said already. And that there is only the COVAX already announced that only the vaccinated 20% within this year to the Africa countries. So it means still there's a not clear mechanism to get to provide the vaccination to country like many Asian countries. So global inequality over.
Please. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, should this global inequality over vaccination continue, this could also extend the opportunity of China and Russia to utilize vaccination diplomacy for the purpose of boosting their geopolitical clout. China, for instance, has secured deals with the various African and Asian countries to roll out this Sinopharm and Sinovac products. With this some geopolitical diplomacy, we people are demanding for vaccination for all over all. However, still we are not getting any trustworthy mechanism in Asia. So finally, we CSO of Nepal coined a thought-provoking slogan already. After government declare parliamentary election on September, we have a slogan that no vaccine no vote, 2 vaccine 1 vote. So thank you, and thank you for time.
Thank you. I think you very interestingly addressed the inequalities within the country also, despite having some at least access to vaccines, how the countries are not taking up responsibility to address the more vulnerable population and using vote as a technique. Thank you, Arjun Bhai. May I request Ms. Caroline Usek Pedo. Sorry for not pronouncing the name properly. She's GCAP Nigeria. Over to you, Caroline.
Caroline, you're muted. Caroline?
Yeah, I have a mute. Can you hear me?
Good. Yes.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, colleagues. I send the special greetings from GCAP Africa to you all. So the emergence of COVID-19 has brought a very negative impact on the African continent, as this has brought about a lot of violations of human rights, poverty, then there is increase in inequalities, among other issues within the continent. So Africa was prepared for the drive of the vaccination in a very big way. Initially, report has it that 49 African countries were rolling out COVID-19 vaccines, and over 22 million doses were given out on the continent. So the lessons were valuable that were emerging, but there were major risks and challenges that are currently threatening the Africans' fragile gains on this impact. So according to WHO, just 1% out of the 1.3 billion COVID-19 vaccines that are given globally have been administered in Africa so far. And 2 weeks back now, it has fallen back to nothing. So on the supply crunch, there are a lot of issues because Africa was relying on the doses from COVAX and the Serum Institute of India. But right now they are being left behind as the vaccines are now being used for domestic use. COVID-19 rollouts have been exemplary in some African countries, and 8 African nations have already used all the COVAX doses that were given to them, while 9 African countries have given less than a quarter of their doses, and 15 countries have used less than half. A lot of challenges are befalling the COVID-19 rollout in Africa. And one of the biggest challenges that is facing Africa is that of the general illiteracy towards the concept of the vaccine. Because most of the people's judgments are clouded by superstition, misinformation, and ignorance. Also, there is a recent challenge of insufficient funding, because the World Bank estimates that Africa still needs around $12 billion to reach enough people to ensure adequate protection from COVID-19. Now, most African countries allocated funds to cover the cost of rolling out the first batch of vaccines, and some to reach health workers, but funding shortfalls have posed a growing threat as the number of people to be reached rises and areas to be covered located further away, because the major cities, the distance from the major cities to the communities where the real people are is very far. And the funds to access these places, they are not available. So lack of funds is causing delays and lack of vaccinators. We don't even have. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you now. Please go ahead, Karen.
Okay, good, sorry. So weaker communications to boost the uptake of vaccines and inability to capture crucial data or to print and distribute even in the immunization cards. There are no funds for all these things to be done. Then there is issue of the vaccine safety and hesitancy. Some African countries have stopped their vaccines rollouts due to the safety concern. A lot of reports that are coming are so negative because there are impacts that the people are seeing adverse side effects from the vaccines. So they paused it. Especially our youths are looking up to Europe and the United States, where reports are coming on the negative adverse side effects. So they too, they are the ones that are even now saying they don't need the vaccine. So there is hesitancy on this aspect. So the attitudes and beliefs impair the process of recovery of the continent. There is need for good, proper planning, resourcing of the vaccination program, starting with education and sensitization to the people. Then another problem is that of targeting the most at risk. Health, yet the older people and are not always easy to identify, particularly in remote areas. They are not being reached. They are priority groups before vaccines arrive. With countries like Angola, Ghana, and Nigeria making use of community mobilizers going door to list people in advance. Mauritius
Caroline, 1 minute to go. 1 more minute for you.
Okay. So Mauritius is one of the African countries which has recently begun its vaccination program against COVID-19. And their government is targeting about 60% of the population. And that would be by the end of August this year. There are also the issues of use of several vaccines from various governments, like the AstraZeneca, the Covishield, the one that is under Covishield, and other ones that governments are beginning to tap into. And then it's disrupting essential health services. COVID-19 vaccination has also disrupted other essential health services and immunization services in over 1/3 of African countries throughout the pandemic and the onset of the vaccinations. Other issues of health are not being paid attention to. So these attitudes and beliefs impair the process and recovery of the continent, and there is need for good planning and proper resourcing of the vaccination program. So there is need for mobilization, there is need for education, and there is need for sensitization. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caroline. I think you brought out some more strains of how this issue has created certain further complications at our country levels, and also need a kind of a concerted campaign to take us forward. Thank you very much. Sorry for the restrictions on time, but that is something that we all have to adjust because of the time constraints of the Zoom. May I request Professor Jayati, if are you able to stay with us for some more time, or can I just send in request Ingo to highlight some of the questions that have been
I can stay for, yes, I can stay for another 20 minutes, so that.
No, then may I request Ingo just to highlight 2-3 questions. You please respond, and then down the line when we open the floor, if you have the time.
Okay.
Please, I think that's
all right. Okay. Thank you.
I think you towards the end. Ingo, can you just highlight some of the questions that have come, please?
Yes, I'm just reading. There was a question from Alok Kumar Singh from RDC Nepal. How much possible to vaccinate whole population of poor and developing countries? Lots of research shows the adverse effect of currently used medicine for treatment of COVID-19 cases. How safe is vaccination, as there are huge criticism about different vaccines? I think this is in line with what Caroline said, also about several African countries. So I think that's an important point. So the other point is also about the funding. You have mentioned the funding issue at the beginning, but so what are the key demands? I see just now the question of Becky Malai from the Philippines, where most countries have already rolled out vaccination. There's still a low rate of vaccination globally. Why is this so? Besides supply and demand? Is there hesitancy to vaccination in your countries? Why is this so? That's again in the same direction. Maybe we let's see whether there are more questions. You can write in the chat, so then we have a second round maybe afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. You know, I'm very happy this question was raised by Caroline and by Alok Kumar and the others about the hesitancy, because I think a lot of this is happening because we have, as I mentioned before, we have never had vaccines approved so quickly globally. You know, even the Ebola vaccine was developed after 7 years. And all the others, you know, basically they are tried and tested over years, so you know all of the side effects and you know all of the different possibilities. In this case, we do not even know how long the effect lasts. So that's true. That is absolutely true. But because of this, there have been all kinds of rumors that have circulated, and people have actually responded to these because they are suspicious. How could it be actually done so quickly? I think there are 2 points to be made here. One is that we certainly do not know, especially with the mRNA vaccines, mRNA vaccines, we do not really know the long-term things because it's the first genetic vaccine. You know, it's the first one that alters the gene structure. But on the other hand, what we do know is that so far the evidence suggests that the way it alters the gene structure is completely safe, and that our gene structures anyway get altered over time because of all the other things we do, including the chemical food that we eat or the pollution we're exposed to and so on and so forth. The other feature of this is that, you know, there were some highly publicized incidents of blood clotting with AstraZeneca and a bunch of other, well, basically with AstraZeneca, and I think one with Johnson & Johnson as well. These were very highly publicized, but it turns out that the rate of blood clotting was actually lower than in the general population. So despite what happens is that whenever someone is vaccinated, anything that happens to that person afterwards is seen as a consequence of that vaccination, which need not be the case. So when you look at it, the idea that there is a necessary link between the AstraZeneca vaccine or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and the blood clotting, there was no evident physiological link. It was all because there were some people, women basically, who got vaccinated who then got blood clots. It turns out that in fact that incidence is lower than it is among women in the general population of that age group who get blood clots. But that took some time to work out. And as a result, there was a knee-jerk reaction by some states, particularly in Europe. They withdrew the vaccine, then they did more research, then they came back and they reinstated the vaccine. That, I think, has had a very bad effect on public notions of acceptability. However, I think now the scientific evidence and overwhelming belief is that these are safe and effective vaccines. That is to say, they will not harm you and they will be reasonably effective. And of course, the proportions of effectiveness, we all know, they vary by vaccine, but they're reasonably high. They are much higher, for example, than the flu vaccine, which many people take regularly on a, older people often take the flu vaccine. The rates of safety and effectiveness are higher for all of the approved vaccines than they are for the flu vaccine. So the vaccine hesitancy is something that has really been created by the speed of approval and the fact that that then gives rise to suspicions. And of course, social media can go crazy on this, right? You can get all kinds of messages which tell you this, and then you say, oh my God, therefore I should resist it. I think it's very important for public health authorities to make it very clear that yes, there is a limitation that we have done this as an emergency authorization, but given that it actually has so far remarkably good efficacy. All of these major vaccines have got remarkably good efficacy. They are known to be safe so far, and that, it's much, much better than actually getting the disease. That if you contract COVID-19, your chances of being healthy are so much worse than if you actually take the vaccine, that it is in everyone's interest for you to take the vaccine. The final point I would like to make is that, ultimately the real constraints are precisely supply and resources. They are not the hesitancy. I do not believe that the hesitancy is what is preventing African countries from vaccinating more of their population. I believe there's huge unmet demand for vaccination, even in Africa. And it is really the shortage of vaccines and the fact that governments cannot afford it, as Caroline pointed out, that they don't have the money to do all the other associated activities. Some African countries will have to spend 30% of their health budgets on the vaccination process. And therefore, I think those are the issues that we should be addressing and dealing with.
Thank you, Jayati. We will take rest of the questions as we open up the floor after the panelists speak. Thank you very much. If you're able to be there, great. But we will be in touch for this campaign. Thank you so much. I would like to apologize to Georgina because she had wanted to leave because there's another seminar. I would like now to invite Georgina Munoz from the Latin DAD. She's the convener of Latin Debt and Development Campaign. And she is also the co-chair of Global Call to Action Against Poverty. So please have your interpretation. So welcome. And over to you, Georgina. 6 minutes.
Gracias y espero que nos puedan hacer la traducción, por favor, y que Joanes me dé la indicación. Voy a eliminar cámara para tener más estabilidad en la comunicación. Bien, ¿qué salió mal en Latinoamérica para que realmente se convirtiera en la región más afectada del mundo por la pandemia? Y este lema que llevamos adelante, vacuna gratuita para todos en todas partes, es esencial para nuestros pueblos. Prácticamente en la gran parte del mundo desarrollado, los pedidos de vacuna ya van por miles de millones de dosis. Sin embargo, la mayoría de nuestras naciones en Latinoamérica y el Caribe especialmente, que somos menos desarrollados, y en África, el virus continúa causando grandes estragos. Y en muchos de los casos no hay un control sobre esta situación. Y las campañas de vacunación realmente se realizan con demasiada lentitud. No hay una respuesta rápida para proteger a los sectores más vulnerables. Si recordamos, la Organización Mundial de la Salud ha indicado que la inmunidad colectiva contra el COVID-19 se logra cuando tenemos el 60 al 70% de la población que es inmune. Entonces eso indica que la vacuna es urgente porque es ella la que va a proteger a nuestras poblaciones. Prácticamente la estimación que tenemos de población en América Latina es de 1.020 millones de habitantes. De ellos, 650 millones en América Latina y el Caribe y 370 millones en América del Norte. Prácticamente Latinoamérica es la región con más muerte per cápita en el mundo. Y en mayo ha tenido los peores datos del planeta. América Latina y el Caribe suman más de 1 millón de fallecidos por COVID. Y eso observamos como en Brasil, en México, en Colombia, en Argentina y Perú ya se suma el 89% de las muertes. Esto en un contexto donde la vacunación avanza muy lentamente. Solo tenemos un rango de 3% de la población vacunada y en algunos casos países que ya alcanzan el 9%, pero son muy pocos. Prácticamente la región es un epicentro del COVID-19. Por supuesto que esta situación debiera de convertirla en ser un epicentro para la vacunación. prácticamente hay 153.000 millones de personas vacunadas en América, tanto América Latina, del Caribe y América del Norte. Pero de esos 153 millones de personas, solo el 21.6% está en América Latina y el Caribe, según los datos de la OPS. Y esto es preocupante porque nuestra gente está a la deriva, sobre todo los sectores marginados. Los fallecidos en nuestra región por COVID se concentran principalmente en 5 países, los cuales suman el 89% de los decesos. Lidera Brasil con 44% de fallecidos, le sigue México con 22% de fallecidos, Colombia con 8%, Argentina con un 7% y Perú con un 6.7%. Desafortunadamente, estamos entre las regiones más afectadas, donde el manejo de la pandemia ha sido el más equivocado y porque realmente hay un problema estructural, social, económico y político. El sistema quedó desnudado y en evidencia de que los sistemas de privatización de la salud no respondieron a la población. No tenemos las suficientes camas, los suficientes vacunas, las suficientes equipos para enfrentar el COVID y nuestra región ahora padece de estos tremendos males. Hay algunos países que se destacan en los procesos de vacunación que hay que mencionar. Por ejemplo, Chile es uno de los que tiene el 63% de la población vacunada. Sin embargo, hay una serie de problemáticas sociales que ha generado la pandemia y económica, que hay grandes movilizaciones. Y no solo en Chile, en Ecuador, en Colombia, en Perú, en Bolivia, en Centroamérica. O sea, hay un caldo muy fuerte de movilización de las personas que tiene que ver directamente con el problema que estamos teniendo de hambruna. Entonces, prácticamente yo quiero referirme también a que tenemos el problema de la vacuna. ¿Cuáles son los sectores que se han priorizado para vacunar en nuestra región Latinoamérica? Están las personas mayores de 60 años, las personas con enfermedades crónicas, el personal médico y sanitario, el personal educativo y las Fuerzas Armadas en menor medida. Prácticamente este es un gran reto que tenemos las organizaciones y demandamos a que haya financiamiento para que la vacuna sea gratuita. Desde LatinLab y conjunto con GCAP respaldamos las emisiones de derechos especiales de giro, DEC, y también la moratoria de las deudas, para que esos fondos sean invertidos directamente por los gobiernos en un proceso amplio de vacunación y que se le pueda dar respuesta a los pueblos. Gracias, creo que me pasé un poco del tiempo.
Thank you, Georgina. Yes, I think the translation does need a little time. Not only that, we have to ensure that Hindi first has to be translated from English and then English to Hindi. But thank you very much. Many of our participants were able to comprehend the concerns that you have raised, and you raised mainly the issues of how do we ensure a faster growth of vaccination even within the limited resources that the countries have, and how do we accelerate this while still campaigning for the other issues of access to vaccines by the countries. I think this is a double-edged war that we'll have to really take on. Thank you very much, Georgina. Now, may I request Bina Palikal from the Asia Dalit Rights Forum to share, primarily from the view of the traditionally discriminated communities called Dalits and several others across the world called communities discriminated on work and descent. Over to you, Bina. You have 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to all the speakers who've gone before me. I'll try to be as brief as possible, and my focus would be mostly on communities from discriminated by work and descent, and we'll take the case of Dalits in India. We all know that there has been a hue and cry since the second phase has really hit, the communities at a very large scale. We're hearing stories, we're hearing so many accounts and experiences of people on the ground. We must know that in India, the health budget of the GDP is only 1.5% of the total GDP, which is very, very less as compared to many other countries, even many other countries in the region itself. Not to mention that countries like US and other countries spend almost 15 to 16% of their GDP on health, which is a huge budget. So ours is so the demand to increase the health budget from 1.5 to at least 3% is much more stronger demand during a time like the pandemic. And I think we should cry more loudly than we've done before to increase that budget. Actually, the ideal would be 5%, but at least if they increase it to 3%, they would be able to match up to some of these demands that we have seen that 6.4% of the population of India has been vaccinated, which is a very small percentage of the total population of 1.2, 1.3 billion people. We also have seen that if we were to take the GDP and if we were to look at ensuring that all the people in India are to be vaccinated, it comes up around 14% of the total GDP. If we were to take per vaccine to about 300 rupees per vaccine, at that rate, if we look, it's about 14% of the total GDP, which is not much for them to spend, considering that then they would be able to ensure that the next wave doesn't hit as much if there were a next wave. However, breaking this down and unpacking this a little, a lot in this People's Vaccine campaign has talked about the inequalities between countries, where the richer countries are hoarding vaccinations. I think Ms. Ghosh already mentioned how Canada has 11 times more, US has so many times more. But I think it's also very critical and important to look at the inequalities within the countries and how access to health is so very critical to communities that are most affected and that who are traditionally discriminated, compounded more because of the impact of COVID during this time. So I would just like to quickly take one of our partners, the Ambedkar Lohya Vichar Manch. Mr. Sangram Malik is also here. We did a small survey of one district in Orissa to look at the difference in access to vaccination. Orissa, 34.43% of the total population have been vaccinated, and the second dose, it has been about 4.32% of vaccination. They have looked at about 2,170 households. So it's a very small sample. We would be, I think, scaling this up later, but 12% of the above have been vaccinated, which means that the average of the state average is 34.43, whereas these specific district that is mostly Dalit and Adivasi populated is only 12%. So you can see that there is already a vast difference between the state average and the average vaccine people who are vaccinated in this particular district. And for the second vaccine, it's 4 points for the state average, and for this particular district where there is a higher population of Dalits and Adivasis, it's only about 0.22%. And within that, if you look at women, it's even far lesser. I think within the small amount of people, the numbers are more in terms of women, but I think if you look at the overall, the numbers are much less when we look at women. This is not in any way a large sample that I can give, but at least to show that there is a vast difference. Paul, if you give me just one moment, vast difference between the. I think that is my second point. The third, I feel the policy, can we please mute ourselves, whoever is speaking? The other thing is, I think the policies itself is discriminatory, where we are saying that to be able to get vaccination, you have to register through a smartphone or through if you have a computer and internet. That itself is not accessible by a lot of people. The other thing is you need an ID proof. Many people in informal sector in India do not have ID proof, and many of them come from the marginalized communities, DWD communities. Before I just two recommendations that I would say, like to put forth before I stop. Our demand is that we of course ensure free vaccination. That's a demand across the campaign, but with specific reference to Dalits, Adivasis, men, women, and children from these communities, people with disabilities and trans folks. Let's not forget. Ensure doorstep vaccination for people with disabilities and the elderly people. I think it is so important. And the last, and I think this is not the last, not the least, but the most important, that there has to be sufficient budgets to ensure that free vaccination is given to all. Thank you, NJB.
Thank you very much, Bina. I think you really brought out the differences within the country, among its own citizens of communities who are traditionally discriminated. And you brought up the issue of that, but I'm sure indigenous people with disabilities and sometimes even religious minorities do face this issue. So when we are involved in this campaigning planning, and I think you brought up the issue that we need to really focus on how some of the internal the discriminations within the countries need to be completely anchored for us to address. Thank you very much. May I request now Murali Padmanabhan, who is the president of the Light for the World, especially focusing on persons with disability, to share. Murali, as with everybody, we are now having 5 minutes, and welcome and thank you very much. Go ahead.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. I don't think I will exceed 5 minutes. Hope I'm audible and visible. Hello?
Murali, can you change your camera a bit down that we can see you?
A little.
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you, Paul, and thanks everybody. And I'm going to talk about one of the most marginalized but largest minority group, which is always discriminated and who are affected disproportionately in any given situation. That is people with disabilities. According to World Health Organization, we have got 15% of the world population who have one or other disability. It could be physical, it could be sensory, it could be intellectual, or it could be mental impairments. It is not actually the impairment that makes us more marginalized or vulnerable, but the kind of barriers we encounter. The barrier could be in the environment, it could be in our own attitude, or it could be in the institutional mechanism, frameworks, policies, acts, or legislations. Pandemic doesn't spare us. It also has impacted, I would say, more than disproportionately. It has created new barriers. It has exacerbated the existing barriers, and we have become much more vulnerable to the pandemic, and the disease has crippled the whole life because of several reasons. You cannot think about a physical distancing when somebody needs a personal assistant. You cannot talk about a sort of, how to maintain hygiene when somebody who needs a lot of support. What is happening is the health system currently has no idea as to what to do with people with disabilities because it is not treated as a mainstream health issue. Disability is always treated as a kind of rehabilitation issue, so we are not even in the picture. So that is the major issue. And again, affordability. The current situation, we don't know whether whether you will get vaccine free of cost or we have to pay for it. When it comes to affordability, more than half of the people with the disability who live in acute poverty and they can't afford to go for a paid vaccine. 80% of the population with the disability live in the low income country. So that will explain the reason behind that. So this is the situation. So what do we do? What is the way out? First of all, whether the vaccine, the registration for vaccine is something very challenging. The technology is not accessible to many of us. We find it very difficult to register ourselves to get our turn to have the vaccine, number one, because of the current digital process. Number two is that other priorities, other kind of preferences, and the vulnerability and the dependency of people with the disabilities, that is depriving us, that is also discriminating us from getting the right share. The third thing is that the mainstream health society has to think about people with a disability and how they can ensure that people with a disability are included in the vaccination process. Having said that, the government policy needs to be sort of reformed. Even after a long advocacy, today in India, for example, we could manage a couple of states issuing orders to say there will be designated centers for people with a disability. I don't know how far it is going to be feasible because I sit in a corner of the city and I need to travel 30 kilometers to take my jab. How many of us can do that with the given sort of restrictions, mobility limitations, affordability? And how far we are going to mainstream this? In every center, there should be provisions to ensure people with disabilities get their jabs done. Or as my previous speaker said, whether there can be an affirmative action as an option to have the jabs done at the doorsteps. And about the awareness, information about the vaccination, the kind of misgivings, the miscampaigns, how we are going to address that, and how we can address the issue of vaccinating the people who are vulnerable when they are in a sort of institutional setups or in a kind of internally displaced situation. So all these things have to be considered while thinking of vaccinating people with a disability, and it should be treated as equally prioritized segment rather than a neglected sector. So with that, I'll stop and thank you so much for this opportunity.
Murali, thank you for being spot on, very clear, and very clear about the demands. And you're really once again telling us, we have so many layers we are continuing to abuse and continuing to ignore. And this is a very important one. And even in the whole aspect of physical distancing, we have not sufficiently given thought to what happens to the caretakers that are extremely needed for the persons with the disability. And you brought it out, and I hope that we will not make the same mistake as states, but continue to ensure inclusivity in a much, much more virulent form. Thank you very much. Friends, we have actually another person from an another panelist from migrant perspective, but unfortunately she was not able to join. I apologize for that. So on behalf of the organizers, when the campaign is being planned, we will also be looking at the another layer of exclusion, which is the migrants, both internally displaced people as well as internationally affected communities because of migration. Now, may I request Mr. Masaki Inaba uh, from Africa Japan Forum, who has been taking up this issue relentlessly in several quarters. He's also the leader of GCAP in Japan. Over to you, Masaki. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak about Japanese situation and the civil society activities in Japan. I will share the presentation for you. And can you see me? Can you see the presentation? I need to wait for a moment.
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. So I will speak about the initiative by Africa Japan Forum on vaccination in Japan. Firstly, I would like to explain the situation of Japan on the COVID-19 and also the vaccination. As you see on this table, probably you can see that it is Japan's situation of COVID-19 is better than Western countries. But also the problem is that how to say the as you know that in the West Pacific area and like East Asia and the Southeast Asia and Pacific, the COVID-19 is not severe compared to the other regions. But in Japan, Japan is in the West Pacific area or East Asian area, but Japan's situation is the third worst situation in this region, and after Indonesia and also Philippines. So, and also please see the vaccination situation in Japan. And Japan vaccinated only the 3.5% of Japan of the population, and it is the 123rd in the world, and also lowest in OECD countries, and also in G20 countries, the 18th before South Africa, Republic of South Africa. So that it is very much low vaccination rate. So that this is the this congested, very severe situation for the civil society movement. So that we are facing a very much challenging environment for the civil society movement. And one is that I say, in Japan, the IP protection, intellectual property rights protection is very much strong public support. And this is different from other countries, like especially in the developing countries. And one is that how to say Japan has a long history of the IP-based economic development strategy, and also wide popular support for IP protection as a reward of innovation, and also apparent hostility against neighboring emerging economies on this kind of the patent stealing or something. So this kind of strong public support for IP protection is there in Japan. And also the COVID-19 and we have been in the very much challenging situation. One is better than the West, but a third worst score in Western Pacific. And also vaccination rollout is the worst in OECD countries by now. And also Japan showed a very much lack of the pandemic preparedness, and also no political leadership in the emergency. And also people should protect ourselves without any kind of effective governmental intervention. So this is a very difficult situation in Japan. So that currently the inward looking discourses pursuing narrow national interests have been dominated in the public opinions, including that the mass media and social media. For example, many newspapers says, and also that the public and many political parties says that more public investment for Japanese pharmaceutical industries is necessary to develop Japan-made vaccines. And also, for example, blaming the social movement of patients of side effects of medicines and vaccines in 1980s and 90s. and for Japan's current low investment of vaccine development. So such kind of challenging environment we have been facing, but we have been starting our movement to support and to advocacy for Japanese government to support waiver proposal. As you know, that Japan is one of the countries which strongly opposed the waiver proposal of the South Africa and India WTO, whereas United States and also EU and other countries. And so that we, Japanese civil society, and despite such kind of challenging situation, organized our civil society coalition named the Equal Access to Health and Medical Services on COVID-19 for All Japan Network, with 7 organizations in November 2020. It is consists of the 4 streamlined of the civil society. One is the primary healthcare advocacy organizations, like aligned with the People's Health Movement, and it is a People's Health Movement Japan Caucus, and also SHARE and the Asian Health Institute. And these Japanese organizations are allied with the People's Health Movement, and they would like to work on this issue. And also, Africa-Japan Forum has been working on AIDS activism, whereas, for example, Health Gap in the United States or a treatment action campaign of South Africa. So this is the AIDS activism stream. And also access to treatment advocacy. MSF Japan has been working on this issue. And also trade and investment advocacy with Public Citizen and the Third World Network, the Pacific Asia Resource Center of Japan. They are very much eagerly working on this issue. So these different streamlined civil society joined together and to organize this coalition for to advocate for Japanese government to support the waiver proposal. And what we do is that how to say one is
if you can conclude in 1 minute.
Okay, yeah, petition letter campaign and dialogues with government of Japan. And so we had first official dialogue with government of Japan in February 17 and submitted the first petition letter with 112 signatures, including Asia Pacific civil society organizations, and also that organizations aligned with GCAP. So thank you very much for everybody. And we discussed with Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry. And also through official and unofficial dialogue with government of Japan, we have made some changes of governmental attitudes on the WTO waiver proposal. At least it uses more time to explain its position sincerely and what it is doing for its assistance on COVID-19, especially its contribution for Act Accelerator. So Japanese government has been less arrogant and more serious on this issue. It is, how to say, a kind of change made by our advocacy. And also we organized using other opportunities of dialogues. And we are now calling the second official dialogue with government of Japan, and we will have the dialogue in June 4th, so that we are calling on the sign on to the calling for sign on of every organization, so that I would like you all to join our advocacy for Japanese government. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Masaki. I think a very effective example of how civil society can change certain positions of the government within the country, and also link up with the rest of the civil society organizations for focusing on in-country advocacy. And we really look forward to strengthening the entire advocacy campaign across the world. Thank you very much. Friends, we are really running out of time. And we have one more speaker, very important speaker, Angela Taneja from Oxfam, India. And after that, we have the quick presentation of the campaign planning. We lose our interpreters in the next 20 minutes. So we have very little time. We've already crossed the time. And after that, I'll open the floor for about 10 minutes, and then we need to close. So thank you. And I now invite Angela from Oxfam to share their campaign. And I think we are really trying to combine hands together with this campaign. Over to you, Angela. Thank you.
So fundamentally, a lot of countries have similar issues with respect to the vaccine. So in some ways, it's uh, it's also could possibly be in case it helps with inspiring others in terms of it's pretty straightforward in terms of when it comes down to it. What are we asking for? We are asking for the vaccine to be purchased at a low true cost and provided free of charge to everyone. We're asking for the procurement to be centralized by the national government. For some bizarre reason, in our case, the states have been left to do their own procurements. We are asking for fair allocation of vaccines that prioritizes at-risk groups, and reaching out to the most vulnerable, both socially, economically, as well as in terms of vulnerability in terms of health. And we are saying that it's the state's responsibility to do this. Therefore, the government should do whatever it takes to make this happen. If it means more financial allocations to health, then so be it. Lives are more important. If it means compulsory licensing of vaccines and temporarily seizing the copyright, so be it, because people's lives matter more. Yes, we also ask for our government and for in this instance, in a lot of ways, our position and the government of India's position overlaps. We are asking for relaxation of intellectual property rights. We are asking for addressing vaccine nationalism by rich countries by allowing ban of exports on key ingredients. And we are asking for redistribution of excess vaccine stocks from the global north. What are we do? How did we start and what did we do? We started with, in a lot of ways, it started as a press release, which turned into a policy brief jointly with the Forum for Medical Ethics Society, which is a group that brings out the Journal of Medical Ethics in India. Therefore, Oxfam, along with a reputed entity that works on medical ethics, saying that it is ethical to ensure vaccines are available. We did a press brief, policy brief. The press release turned into a policy brief, which we did jointly. Together, we then took out a petition to the Prime Minister of India in support of those asks. We've had around 600 endorsements, over 600 by now. To a large extent, had support from medical professionals, where around at least 250 were doctors. So therefore, it's not just us civil society people who don't necessarily know health, but it's also health workers and health professionals and health experts who are asking for this. We subsequently did a press release that was covered in around 15 to 20 publications, digital as well as print. Some pick up from the other media as well. We got the petition got picked up by the British Medical Journal as well, since we had health experts who were reputed health experts on board. We also picked up the Vaccine Billionaires press release for the People Vaccine Alliance. Again, that got picked up by at least another 20 publications online, and have been writing op-eds on these issues on an ongoing basis. So therefore, effort to simultaneously reach out to those already involved in these issues and reach out to mainstream and social media, and at the same time have some advocacy with policymakers. Since the endorsement, some discussions ongoing with those who endorsed, because the purpose of having endorsement was not just to have those endorsements, but to start dialogue for follow-up advocacy. So therefore, 4 or 5 buckets of work in terms of follow-up from an advocacy point of view, since India is federal, working with state governments, provincial governments to ensure that they apply pressure on the central government, as well as do whatever is in their purview to do within their own states. Collect evidence of exclusion. We talk about exclusion, but there is very limited evidence of vaccine inequality domestically. So therefore, in conversation with NCDHR, among others, around possible some coordination around that, working with those at the front lines of vaccine delivery, which is community health workers, possibly also tapping into existing networks of first responders who are providing aid during the time of crisis to also take vaccine messages out. Also, so obviously social media is something that is taken for granted that one will be engaging with, but also outreach. If one is, and which I'm shamelessly plugging in here as well, if you are Indian and you want to work on vaccination, on the COVID vaccine, please do let us know so that, because if it's an issue that concerns everyone, and therefore please join the fight, because it's the good fight to fight. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Angela, and thank you very much for the appeal. I think very, very strategic, very clear, focused, and I think it has certainly chances of real bringing a kind of a change in the policies and in the way governments are addressing, especially also on the issue of ensuring equal access to vaccines and also addressing inequalities and the possible discrimination. And I think that is something that we all need to do quickly, because the evidence gathering should not take such a long time for us to really take the whole issue forward. Friends, we have reached almost the end. Now is the critical part. Probably we may need another webinar, but this is a time where what are the campaign ideas for people's vaccine? And over to Ingo, who's the director of Global Call to Action Against Poverty, and Pradeep Baisek, who has organized this, and his focus point, apart from being the regional coordinator, he's the focal point for the People's Vaccine Alliance within GCAP. Over to you, Ingo and Pradeep.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So mainly Pradeep will explain the ideas. Just to introduce, we have seen there's a big interest from GCAP members around the world in this topic, and we can see this also in this call today. We had 100 participants. So we have discussed this issue in the last months, and especially the last weeks, and we got inputs. So we will present what we have so far. So we have heard also from, for example, from Masaki and others about what is already going on. But of course, we want to, we think this is an opportunity to for really strong campaigning. It is very crucial in terms of inequalities within countries, between countries, of course, but also for global solidarity. So I would like to ask Pradeep to present what we have now, and then we want to discuss with you to get your feedback and to plan further. Just to introduce Pradeep as a GCAP Asia coordinator, you know, he's very active on this topic. So especially within the People Vaccines Alliance in Asia, but also globally. So over to you, Pradeep, to present the ideas in the different fields.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Ingo. I will go through this relatively quickly so that we have time for more discussion and get more inputs. These are ideas we are floating, but it's necessary that we get ideas from you, all of you who are working at national level. So The proposal is on research and analysis. We are expecting to develop country or regional papers, policy briefs on vaccination and COVID situation, particularly from the angle of exclusion or inclusion of most marginalized groups. And this should go actually to the formulation of national policy. Like Japan and India, we can issue statements which are meant for the government. That could be done at the national level. We can also do the regional bit, appealing the free vaccination and to adopt priority approach to cover most marginalized groups, which may otherwise be excluded in the process of vaccination. Next. Awareness building, we should develop awareness. From today's webinar, we can see that we need to have comprehensive plan for development of awareness, where the dynamics of the politics behind vaccine is not understood by people, common people. That's so we need awareness. So the kind of awareness webinars we can do simple, frequently asked questions, facts. We can have clear, simple messages on flyers used on social media to galvanize the messages, and the petition to the government itself could be a technique of awareness building. Next. Okay, we are thinking of two strands of advocacy. One is to address inequality among the countries, and the other is inequality within the countries. So at global level, what we are trying to influence is something which has already been dealt with by Jayati and other colleagues, is to support the trip waiver call given by India and South Africa. That trip waiver call is not only given on vaccines, but also on diagnostics and medicines to fight the COVID overall. In the different countries who are opposing this, Canada, UK, Germany, Singapore, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and others. So we are supposed to, at the global level, we are supposed to target these countries to support the TRIPS waiver. The COVAX facility is something we have already discussed. We are supposed to push for more funding for the COVAX facilities, and more importantly, special drawing rights, particularly for the countries who are in debt-ridden, who cannot fund themselves for vaccination and treatment of COVID. Examples are here. Japan has written a letter to its government. Masakian group has written a letter to Japan government to support stop opposing rather the TRIPS waiver proposal. And this is being signed not only by Japanese colleagues, but all of us in Asia and across the globe. GCAP members across the globe have signed it to show and influence the key moments of WTO, G7 and G20. For low and middle income countries, there are some countries who have not openly supported the TRIPS waiver campaign. Let us reach out to them. We'll have to find out the list who are those countries. Reach out to them to support the proposal given by India and South Africa. Next. Next. I'll do this one and then you will take over. Advocacy at the national level, this is primarily to address the inequality within countries. This is something which is discussed already by Beena, Murali. These different groups which may otherwise be left behind. In fact, we are witnessing that they are being left in the process of vaccination. So what we are proposing to demand is a national policy on vaccines. Underline it, because if we have a policy which calls for equitable vaccination, giving priority to the most marginalized groups, looping in the leave no one behind approach, then we'll have very least scope for arbitrary implementation of vaccination program, which we are seeing in countries. So we must demand a equitable national policy on vaccination for equitable and free vaccination. We can do advocacy meeting with favorable members of parliament, give them the both ruling and opposition parties. Explain them the situation, the whole patent issue, how we can bridge inequality within the countries, and hand over the petition that we have. Meet the ministers and government officials who can influence the process. Next. Ingo, you want to take over from here?
No, please conclude with the media.
Okay, so on media, the media has of late started picking up. I can see it in India, not actually in many countries. So media engagement is quite key. Not just to flag up our issue, but reach out to the editors, explain them, give them the documents, the chatters, the policy briefs that we have, enlighten them with the issue of patent, issue of exclusion within the countries, and meet the reporters, whoever, and reach out to also the people who are writing opinion pieces on such issues of discrimination, on health and otherwise, and organize television debates to flag the issues to reach to the larger population. Next. Ingo, you take
Okay,
over.
so yeah, of course, as we know, advocacy is very important, but mobilization or public actions are also needed to create the pressure. So I'm really, in a way, as a German, very, very sad and shocked about the position of the German government not, I mean, to block the vaccine TRIPS waiver. And so I really hope that there's much more public outcry. So that's something we want to plan to also together with you. Of course, at the moment, mostly it is online, online actions on whether it's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram or others. To send flyers, to do something in creative action like hand painting, face painting, but also photographs or videos, especially from marginalized people to get a voice, and also case studies. So those are some of the ideas. But we also see that offline actions are also very important. So like rallies or small stunts. So that we want to plan together. And of course, to see that we can coordinate globally at certain moments, whether WTO meetings on the WIPS, on the TRIPS waiver, or the ministerial meeting or the G20 meetings. So that is something we would like to do the coming months, and we are collecting ideas. And the one thing we are working on is the interactive website. So this is both for awareness raising, but also for mobilization. So this one is mainly focusing on the demand for the people's vaccine, but also for the funding. So that means the debt relief and special drawing rights. So there's a real opportunity that the special drawing rights, which will be issued by the International Monitoring Fund, can be used not only for different spendings. So social protection is definitely important, but also vaccination could be one good purpose to spend this. So we would like to create this website and to use it for joint campaigning. Yeah, just to conclude this part, alliance building is also important. So we are part of the People's Vaccines Alliance. So we would like, in Asia, we are very active. We would also encourage other regions to connect to other members of the People's Vaccine Alliance to build strong movements in the different regions. So as always, we don't want that a movement which is dominated by the North, but it should be led and co-led by the Global South. Also to convene at national level the national planning of the People's Vaccines campaign. So just for the process, we'd like to get your feedback and your inputs now in this call, and also afterwards by emails and in communication. We would like you to discuss this at national level and also in regions and constituency groups to plan together what you want to do, and then also what we want to do together, so that we can agree globally on 2-3 actions, also coordinated actions, and then of course to take actions nationally and in constituency groups. Finally, and yeah, we like to get your feedback, and this is probably we like to ask you now to write this in the chat. What do you need for information? Was this webinar good in terms of information? Do you need more information? Then for advocacy planning, what are you planning in your country, in your constituency group? Are the proposed actions interesting for you? And then for the global mobilization and advocacy, what are your proposals? Do you think, yeah, do you support what we proposed? Or what do you think we could do together? So I would like to ask you to write in the chat. We don't have much time left, but if you can write also your constituency, your country, and write a few ideas on these 3 questions, that would be very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ingo and Pradeep. So coming straight to the point, we would like you to respond to the 3 questions that is still there on the thing. Whether the information of this webinar has been is enough, or would you like more, or what kind of interventions could be planned at the national level, regional level, and at also the constituency. What are the possible actions that you can take up, and how we can do global advocacy, alliance building, and mobilization, and we can make this aspect of GCAP's work as part of People's Vaccine Alliance. I think this is something which is really the crux of this matter. So I just like to ask the administrator, just 1 second, that we will be very thankful to all the subjects. Can you mute yourself, please? To thank all the interpreters, because I know you will have to leave in 2 minutes. So which means, unfortunately, we will have only in English, and if anybody else is speaking, then somebody will do sequential interpretation, but we can only go for another 15 minutes. So is that okay, Pradeep, or how do you want to see?
Yeah, we can continue for 15 minutes, but Stefania has to leave in 2-3 minutes. So if any specific question to Stefania, colleague from GCAP Italy, yeah, who presented the Civil 20, could be done now.
I request
she leaves.
Yeah, I request Stephanie to start, and then Subhajit, and then if you have, kindly chat on the box. We will take that also, and definitely this is not the last meeting, and from the participation we know it's an important one, and so we will take it up. And thank you once again to all the interpreters. Sorry, I may not know all of them by name, but Hector definitely, and Johannes and Suraj and Sudhir and all the other Cherava and Sephora, I think, who are the French interpreters, and the other Spanish interpreters. Thank you very much. If you think you have to leave, please leave, yeah, whenever you feel, and we will continue in English. And yeah, thank you. Over to Stefania.
I think she has left probably.
No, I'm here. I'm here. Sorry, I didn't. I don't see any question, if I'm not wrong. So I would thank all of you for this webinar, and I would say let's stay in touch.
Can I speak something?
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
We're also taking questions on the 3
Yes,
aspects.
yes. Go ahead.
Yes, is it?
I can't hear very bad.
sorry, no, we will keep in touch. We are trying to strengthen this campaign, and we'd like to hear also from others. But thank you, Stefania. We will come back to you, and we will take your support for strengthening this campaign. So can I ask, who was it? Subhajit, I think, to share. Over to you, Subhajit.
Can you hear me, sir? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
हाँ, नमस्कार, मैं शुभजीत बोल रहा हूँ कोलकाता से, सेक्रेटरी वी आर द कॉमन पीपल। सर, मेरा सुझाव ये था कि वादा ना तोड़ अभियान के साथ जो हम लोग जुड़े हुए हैं, काफी दिनों से उनका कोई एक्टिविटीज हम लोगों का अभियान का रहा नहीं रिगार्डिंग कोलकाता एंड वेस्ट बंगाल। तो पहले ये स्ट्रक्चर के बारे में।
I would like to take my leave. Is there anything for me?
हेलो,
आवाज नहीं आ रही।
हाँ, मेरा वॉइस सुन पा रहे हैं सर? हेलो।
Yes, there is some interruption, Subhajit. Just hold 1 second. Was it Cherry?